eines Buches der Autorin ZHANG Lijia. Die Autorin ist selbst also heute auch da. Und das Buch heißt Es lebe der Sozialismus. So, und vorgestellt wird das Buch, das ist erschienen im Drachenhaus Verlag von der Nora Frisch. Nora Frisch ist auch Sinologin. Sie hat in Wien und in China und wo noch überall studiert. Okay, Entschuldigung. Und ja, sie hat 2010 den Drachenhaus Verlag gegründet. Mittlerweile wirklich sehr erfolgreich, ein sehr umfangreiches, sehr, sehr, sehr interessantes Verlagsprogramm. Sie hat auch einen Stand hier auf der Buchmesse, also wer da noch mal morgen vielleicht vorbeischauen will. Sie verlegt sehr interessante Bücher, Übersetzungen, viele Übersetzungen aus dem Chinesischen. Und heute ist die Autorin ZHANG Lijia bei uns. Sie ist Jahrgang, das finde ich jetzt gerade nicht auf meinem Spickzettel. Nicht, nein, Entschuldigung. Okay, also 1964 geboren und ist 1990 nach London gegangen und lebt seitdem auch in London und schreibt eben wunderbare Bücher, von denen jetzt eins erschienen ist. Und damit gebe ich auch gleich weiter. Dankeschön. Danke.
Ja, ich möchte mich auch noch erstmal ganz herzlich beim Konfuzius-Institut in Frankfurt bedanken, dass die dieses Ereignis möglich macht, diesen Auftritt hier. Und speziell an Frau Christina Verumwang und Herrn Eugen Pfander für die umfangreiche Organisation. ZHANG Lijia, who lives in London and Beijing today, was born in Nanjing in 1964. At the age of 16, she was forced to enter a rocket factory as a worker before she went to London in 1990 to study journalism. For many years, she has been writing for international publications such as The Guardian, the South China Morning Post, Newsweek, and the New York Times. She is also a regular guest on radio and television stations such as BBC, Channel 4, and CNN. ZHANG Lijia has written several books, including her autobiography, Socialism is Great, which we will introduce today. Oops. Oh. In this book, she describes how she grows up in the Nanjing of the 1980s as the daughter of a poor working-class family. Danke. In a society characterized by intellectual narrowness and a strong pressure to conform. Können wir die Bilder kurz sehen, bitte? Ah, ja. So we see the pictures of her, of the time of her growing up in Nanjing, over there. She's very thirsty for knowledge and has ambitious plans. When she's forced to do monotonous work in a rocket factory, she begins to struggle for self-determination and freedom. She wears Western clothes, studies English, and in the summer of 1989, the time students went to protest on Tiananmen Square in Beijing, she eventually organizes the city's largest workers' demonstration in Nanjing. This tragic, but in big parts also very funny story, provides a rare insight into the human dimensions of the period of upheaval under Deng Xiaoping, which made China the country it is today. And it is also a wonderful example for a biography which was just talked about before. So we have a real Chinese person here, a bridge builder. And yeah, I would ask ZHANG Lijia to read a short passage from the text, from the original, which I will continue in the German version.
Thank you kindly, Nora, for the very kind instruction. I'm going to continue the instruction because you already know when I was born. So, you know, in China, each character has a meaning. So my name, my given name is Lijia. Zhang is the most common surname in the world. And my name, Lijia, Li as in beautiful, Jia as in refined. So beautiful and refined. Obviously, that's my parents' impossible dream. I'm going to read a few sentences in English. Out of the tall workshop buildings, black chimneys rose higher, interrupting the skyline like legs of a spider dead on its back. Smoke sipped out, lingering a while in the cold air, then dissolving slowly into nothing.
In der Schule schrieben wir über Fabrikschlote, wann immer die Lehrer es von uns verlangten. Aufsätze über die großen Errungenschaften unseres Landes. Mit Standardphrasen wie prächtige Schornsteine, die in den Himmel ragen, bestätigten Kinder in ganz China diese Symbole des sozialistischen Fortschritts. Dabei fand ich diese Schlote eigentlich schroff und hässlich. Am letzten Tag unserer einmonatigen Schulung wurden wir zu einem Rundgang durch das Produktionsgebiet von Liming mitgenommen. Obwohl meine Mutter ihr ganzes Leben lang dort gearbeitet hatte, hatte ich das Gelände noch nie betreten. Ohne einen offiziellen Pass mit Foto war niemandem der Zutritt gestattet. Ein Gewirr von Rohrleitungen in Bodennähe sandte dissonante Töne aus. Einige waren mit weißem Plastik umwickelt, aus anderen trat Gas aus, sie gaben heftige Zischlaute von sich, wie ein gefangenes Tier, das zu entkommen versucht. Aus manchen Biegungen in den Rohrleitungen sickerte weißer Nebel. I asked you to choose a key passage. Why did you choose this part?
I guess that's just kind of a set the scene, give you a flavor what the factory was like. Yes.
Well, many people would be really bitter about what you have experienced, but this does not seem to be the case with you. On the contrary, you describe your life with a lot of humor and self-irony and manage to find something positive even in the most hopeless situations. Where did you get this resilience?
I must say I wasn't thrilled when I was taken out of school. I was a good student and I was hoping I would go to university and become a writer and journalist. And since I was young, I always wanted to be a writer and journalist. So I wasn't very happy with the decision being dragged out of school. But as I grew older and I understood my mother, being uneducated, she did not quite appreciate the value of education. But she thought the best thing a mother could do was to secure a job for her daughter. That's what she did. And for many years, I enjoyed a close relationship with my mother. Yeah, and I guess my life has not been easy. And in some ways, I suffered lots of setbacks in both professional and personal life. That made me resilient, and I'm grateful for that. And honestly, I just think I've been extremely lucky to got where I am now. I think I worked hard, and I met people who went out of the way to help me. And also, I was lucky I was born in the right time. China just began to change. Mm-hmm. So, if I was like my mother was smart. She never got anywhere. She basically did one type of job, stuck in the factory all her life. So I feel I've been very lucky. I'm very grateful to the jobbing.
You write in your epilogue that you see yourself as a bridge builder between China and the so-called West. What is your message to Western readers, and what the other way around? What would you tell some of the characters you describe, especially the chauvinist ones, from today's female perspective?
I think that you're asking quite a big question. Let me try to unpack it. So I think I grew up in China, and I wanted to be a journalist. That was quite difficult, but I believe that I also have something that other Western journalists don't have, which is the insight into Chinese society. And I think China has become more important than ever. China's economic power, any country's economic power has to be translated into political influence. But I think in China's case, there's still, China has become too important to be ignored. But yet there are so many misunderstandings and fear, or at least uneasiness about China. And I believe some of the fear is generated by ignorance. So what I'm trying to do, perhaps in my small way, to help people outside China to have a better understanding where China is coming from, what is happening now, why it's going. So I think once you have a better understanding of China, you have a more sympathy, or at least empathy towards China, and certainly less fear. And now, particularly, I think, since Putin's invasion of Ukraine, you know, China's failure in condemning the invasion has kind of damaged China's image. Yeah, sometimes I'm just talking to ordinary Westerners. I live in London. People just almost. You know, I write articles to criticize China, but I also see what China has achieved. So not everything about China is terrible or bad. And I'm not a dissident either.
You describe the society you grew up in as extremely controlling or even repressive, and many people downright apparatchiks put hurdles or obstacles into your way wherever they could because they were jealous or they didn't want you to get any further. And they were really conformist to the party, and you were regarded as conspicuous because you were wearing Western clothes or were dressed differently and had the most interesting spectacles or glasses you could find in town. And nevertheless, many passages can almost be understood as a declaration of love to your compatriots. That's how I read it, at least. And characters you describe are maybe somewhat bizarre, but thoroughly likable. What reconciled you when all you really wanted that time was to get out?
Anyway, again, you covered quite a lot of few points. I would want to say, talking about China, I think individualism, I would not say describe it as a kind of an important part of our culture. For example, we have lots of Chinese saying urging people do not stand out. For example, we say a big tree catches wind, 树大招风. The bird flies out first, gets shot first. And so all these things urge you to not stand out, to be different. But I think China today has become more individualistic. And I've just returned from China, where I'm trying to working on a new project about young Chinese women's changing attitude towards marriage and motherhood. And so women become, I think the China's low birth rate is driven by urban educated people. They become more individualistic, and they do not necessarily see marriage or motherhood as necessary ingredients to happiness. So China has changed a lot. But I think that all these changes started in 80s. I mean, for me and many of my friends, 80s was probably the most fascinating era in contemporary China. Deng Xiaoping introduced the reform, which changed China beyond the economic field. And from then, you know, in my book, I was trying to different. I was wearing Western clothes. Now I prefer Chinese clothes. And that's also the 80s was a time when people began to dream the impossible, chasing their dreams, and dreaming the impossible. Women taking off their, before everybody was wearing Chairman Mao's kind of a lumpy jacket. One American journalist very famously said, after China introduced reform opening up, Chinese women suddenly got breasts, because before everybody was the woman's body was hidden this lumpy, shapeless gray jacket. Yeah.
So how do you explain that people really try to put these obstacles into your way? Why didn't they want you to proceed in your, or wanted to hinder you in your way?
Yes, I guess, at least at that time, people thought I was strange. for example, I guess that's probably my rebellious side of me come out. So I started teaching myself English, and I become more individualistic. And I become learning English. Looking back, I really changed my life. So once I started to learn English, I become quite obsessed. I often find myself riding my bicycle in the dark street of Nanjing, singing carpenter songs.
And they called you the toad who wanted to eat swan's meat.
Yeah. And people start laughing at me, and they said, "You're a little factory worker. Why would you want to learn English?" Slowly, I just didn't care what people thought of me. My English sounded probably quite different from what. Yeah. Shall I give an example?
Yes.
Merry 克里斯姆斯安德 Happy New Year. I think I just wish you early Christmas, Happy Christmas.
Okay. In your book, you write very openly about the many relationships you had.
Not too many, a few.
Quite a few. And above all, also amazingly openly about sex. In the China of the 80s and 90s, it would probably have been impossible to publish a book like that. How's the situation today? Would it be possible to publish this book in China?
This book won't be, it's not possible. Somebody actually, I was talking to my friend Shen Yang, and a Chinese guy, he just loved the book, and he translated it into English. Anyway, so, but it won't be able to publish in China because it's not because of the sex part. It is more likely because I wrote about, and towards the end, in 1989, I organized the protest, the biggest one among factory workers in support the democratic movement led by students in Tiananmen. And back on the sex part, and I think because I wrote in English, that took away some inhibition I might have. If I wrote in Chinese, I think the sex thing would be much less explicit or detailed, because I would worry my mother would read it. So I wrote in English. I think that's a wonderful thing because English is not my native tongue. But I still struggle, by the way, I'm sure you have noticed, and after studying English for all these years, I still make basic mistakes. But writing English also, I feel I have certain advantage because it's not my native tongue. I have the freedom, and really, I don't know how I can articulate this. It's freed me politically because I write in English. I do not go through the censorship. 20 years ago, I was invited by a Chinese publishing company to write a book about, when I was living at Oxford, to write a book about the Western image of Chairman Mao. And I wrote the book, but it did not pass the censorship because they think it's too negative. So ever since then, I decided to write in English, so I do not have to go through the censorship. And also, it freed me literally because English is not my native tongue. I can afford to have an adventure. I structure my sentence differently. I use different verbs. I borrow Chinese saying to spice up the language. My last book is a novel, and my editor fell in love with the language because the way I write gives the language a freshness. I hope I answered your question.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Are there any questions from you would like to ask ZHANG Lijia?
I promise I'll be very open.
Otherwise, is there anything you would like to tell about your family? Maybe the family you grew up in. It was a very loving family, I have the impression. I mean, your mother was very...
My grandmother was a very special person. My grandmother... my last book is it's a book followed the life of a young migrant worker turned prostitute. Because before my grandmother passed away, I learned she was a courtesan. She was sold into prostitution. So ever since then, I have a fascination about prostitution. And in some ways, I hope that will help me to understand what, what she went through, yeah. So my grandmother was a very special person. I guess she suffered so much in life, but she was really gentle, very loving, and not bitter about life. And I think just she was just one of those women from her generation who could take so much suffering without bitterness, which is very different from today's young people. Yeah. Today's young people, they're like a strawberry, easily bruised. The life has become easier. My grandmother's generation life was just so unbearably tough.
Yes, you said your grandfather killed himself because...
My grandfather killed himself during the Cultural Revolution because he didn't have the political correct background, yeah.
But your family never let this get close to you. So you said
yes,
you were...
Yes. I only discovered about my grandmother's story shortly before she passed away, yeah.
And the disputes with your mother, I think they're sometimes really quite funny because you were really giving her contra. But she was, from her perspective, you said you understood her now, or later you understood why she acted the way she acted. She wanted to give you the tier 1 fan, the iron rice bowl, and this was the best thing she could do to her daughter, although it really cut you off from education.
Yes, I understood her better. So and for many years now, my mother passed away 6 months before COVID. But before that, I bought a flat for my mother, and I tried to see her whenever I could. Yeah. I just wish she was proud of me, but it was a little bit difficult. And I guess as children, we all want our parents to feel proud of us. But for the woman of my mother's generation, success is measured by money. You know, I have given lecture to all top university, Harvard, Stanford, New York, Columbia. I published the New York Times. I published Newsweek. I was interviewed by BBC Sky regularly. But all these things are very difficult to tell my mother.
Yeah, but I thought this passage was very funny where you translated for the first time, I think, some
yes, it's a travel documentary
about Peru. Yeah. And your parents were so proud because in the end your name was shown, and the whole family was on TV, was close to the TV set and watching your name come up. And
yes, but unfortunately, I think for still even today, like I was in Nanjing just a few weeks ago. I was telling my sister I'm coming to Frankfurt, and my sister said, "How much money could you make from this trip?" I said, "I'm afraid probably not very much." She said, "Why would you bother?" And I think, what amazing experience. I come here, I was put up in a nice hotel, I meet all sorts of fascinating, interesting people. So
that hasn't really changed.
I guess for me, it's how rich one and how rich one is measured by memorable experience. So I think I'm a super rich woman.
Wow, thank you very much. And we've got a few copies of the book here, so maybe if you want, we can sign them outside. ZHANG Lijia could sign them for you outside, otherwise
and one day I can put on eBay and sell a high price.
Otherwise, you're welcome to visit us at Drachenhaus Verlag. It's in Hall 3.1.
Thank you for your excellent question, Laura.
Thank you too.
Dankeschön.